Hello, friends. Welcome to another episode, a discussion of the Iliad by Homer. Today we're going to be discussing Book 8. This is as Fagles translates it, the tide of battle turns. So remember that we are discussing this story that was written in the 8th century by a poet, a bard by the name of Homer, and that the translation we're using is Fagles. This story consists of the story of Achilles, who has decided to remove himself from the Battle of Troy, remove himself from the Greek army, because of an insult that was done to him. And in the course of his removing himself from the war, he has taken all of his troops with him, and so he's left all of his compatriots completely alone to have to deal with the Trojan army, which is quite powerful. We have seen so far various themes that have been developed during the course of the work. The theme of, for instance, Kleos, the Aristeia of an individual shining forth in a scene of battle. We have seen the themes of hubris, pride, developing in different characters. Paris, for instance, being a great example of hubristic behavior. The work also develops the idea of iconoclasm, which is a sort of pulling out the rug from under the gods, so to speak. And the one that I have been developing with you has been the theme of metamorphosis, which is change or alteration, especially the change that occurs in a human life between childhood and adulthood, following the natural stages of the butterfly, which moves from a grub worm to a chrysalis to a full-grown butterfly. Achilles right now is in the stage of being something in the chrysalis, though some might say he's a little bit of a worm type character. He has started as petulant and immature, and I am the center of the universe. I'm the best of all the Achaeans. And then he gets all mad, and Athena has to hold him back by the hair, like holding back a horse, a young horse. And then he goes to his mother, and he blubbers to his mother, and his mother gets Zeus to help him out. And meanwhile, Achilles basically goes and pouts in his tents, sits in his tents, and reflects on how bad the world has treated him. So, a very immature type of character. In this chapter, we see mostly carnage. The tide of battle turns, as Fagles tells us in the title, and the Trojans rush out from the city, and they push the Greeks, the Argives, the Achaeans, pushes them all the way back to their boats, all the way back to the trench that they've dug around their boats. And there's fierce fighting that occurs. And we'll look a little bit at that. Let's first take a gander at the text itself and see what the text has to say to us. So we're going to go and use Fagles' version here of the story. Let's see. This is Homer's Iliad by Fagles. Here it is. Okay, good. The tide of battle turneth. We open this chapter here with the gods fighting with each other, strangely. The gods keep making sort of little cameos into the story, you notice, and they appear every now and then and do this or that. Most of the time when they do things, they're either ineffective or they're silly. Sometimes they're outright cruel. One way or the other, they're not gods that we really want to emulate. They're not gods that you say, oh, you're so wonderful and glorious and beautiful. It's more like, you're so powerful, I know you'll squish me if I don't make prayers to you. So Homer's point here, I think, is in order to break the hold that the gods had over our imagination. Iconoclasm, basically, the destruction of icons or images. So that, I think, the reader can get a greater sense of themselves as being the hero, themselves as being noble and virtuous, in the same way that Hector, for instance, or Diomedes is noble and virtuous. Well, here we start with the opening scene of dawn, and then the gods are here on Olympus, and immediately Zeus is haranguing the immortals. I like that word that Fagles uses. He harangues the immortals. He lights into them. He basically tells them, don't you guys challenge me. I'm going to do what I want, and I'm going to do that because I'm the most powerful god. Here's what he says. Hear me, all you gods and all goddesses, too, as I proclaim what the heart inside me urges. Let no lovely goddess and no god either try to fight against my strict decree. All submit to it now, so all the more quickly I can bring this violent business to an end. Which is kind of interesting, because if Zeus is saying, listen to me, there's my plan, I'm going to bring this war to an end, you think he cares about the immortals or about the mortals? You think that somehow what he is doing is primarily for the good of the mortals? But we get elsewhere that that isn't so. So it's more like he's just pushing the other gods around, exercising his own power. And he even says that during this speech. He says, any god I catch breaking ranks with us, meaning me, eager to go and help the Trojans or the Achaeans, back he comes to Olympus, whipped by the lightning, eternally disgraced. And he says, I will snatch and hurl him down to the murk of Tartarus, half the world away, as he apparently did with Hephaestus at some point. The deepest gulf that yawns beneath the ground, there where the iron gates and brazen threshold loom, as far below the house of death as the sky rides over earth. Then he will know how far my power tops all other gods. And I think that's the indicator there, that Homer is putting in the mouth of Zeus not compassion for mortals, because otherwise why would he prevent the gods from helping either side? Not even really interest in one group or the other, because again, if he was helping to bring this thing about, he would snuff the Trojans, right, and end the war, or he would squash the Achaeans and end the war, but he doesn't do that. But the main thing is that he wants to show how powerful he is to the other gods. So really, in some ways, this is a power trip on the part of Zeus, which again, it's not exactly the best figure he can cut. But he goes on, he says, I'll hoist up the earth and all you gods, if you try to drag me down, I'm that powerful. Look how powerful I am. It thumps his chest and stomps around, And then all the gods respond with this sort of stunned silence. Stunned silence sees them all struck dumb. Yeah, they're all like, that was unprecedented. That kind of came out of nowhere. That escalated quickly. That really got out of hand. It's in a way, it's comical. And again, Homeric humor is something we have to get a taste for. But if you can imagine that here we start off this book, right? We just ended the Ajax dueling with Hector thing and Hector almost dying, and it was really pretty awful. It was intense. And then you start book 8 with Zeus thumping his chest and this magnificent show of braggadocio and his almost hubristic attitude towards the rest of the gods. And it's really what prompted this? Where did this come from, Zeus? So all the other gods end up being dumbstruck by this raging and stomping around the way he does. And then Athena steps up, clear-eyed Athena, and she says, yeah, we know you're tough, right? We can't stand against you. But even so, we pity these Argive spearmen living out their grim fates, dying in blood. And that's an interesting line, because Athena says, we pity the Argives. There's a certain sense of affection for them that emerges in her and in the other gods. And that's why they're fighting for the Argives, which is a little bit suspect, because there is that whole element of being ticked off at Paris and ticked off at Aphrodite. And there's that element of their own sort of entertainment. But keep that in mind, because as we go further on, we'll see the gods appear again in the text. And if they really have a pity for the humans, they abandon their course of helping the humans very quickly. Or you could say, if they do have a pity for the humans, their pity doesn't extend so far as risking their own necks for other people. And I think Homer is making a direct contrast here between humans and immortals, mortals and immortals. For mortals, risk is part of life. It's part of being mature. It's part of being a hero. That if you have nothing to lose, there is no risk and there's no heroism. There's nothing involved in your action, because it doesn't really make any difference. So we're going to see here in a minute a scene where some characters risk their lives for other characters. humans. And in contrast to that, we're going to see the gods, who, remember, can't die, not risking their necks for humans, or even for other gods, really, but they aren't going to risk their necks, even with the threat of getting hurt. They will not act. Which, again, I think is Homer intentionally putting the gods in a bad light. So keep that in mind. Zeus then turns to Athena and he smiles. He likes Athena. She's his golden little girl who can do no wrong. She sprang from his head after all. So there's a myth for you. He likes her, and the myth of how she came into being is one which perhaps we could take a look at. But let me just finish this passage here. So anyway, she says to him, we know how strong you are, but we pity these Argives. It's really sad what's happening to them. And Zeus says, "Oh, courage, dear child. Nothing I said was meant in earnest. I didn't mean a lick of it." Which again is comical. It's kind of funny. It's like the big CEO pounding his chest and thumping, "Yeah, we're gonna have these changes in the company." Boom, 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 boom. And then somebody says, we don't know. Is that a good idea? And then he's like, "I'm just kidding you. Trust me, I mean you all the goodwill in the world, right?" And then he harnesses up his chariot and he goes and he sits on the mountain and he watches the battle. As it says, there the father of men and gods reigned in his team, set them free, and around them poured a dense mist, and Zeus assumed his throne on the mountain top, exalting in all his glory, gazing out over the city walls of Troy and the warships of Achaia. So he's gazing at both groups, and that's important because when he gazes at one group, they get stronger. When he gazes at another, they get stronger. Here, he's just kind of gazing out generally over the battle and just seeing what's going on. So that being the case, what happens next is that the Trojans fling wide their gates and they surge out in order to attack the Argives in earnest. And they're doing this after a small respite, a truce that has been going on. And they rush out suddenly because they want to make a big push and push the Argives into the sea, burn their ships, and end this darn thing that's been going on for 9 years now. So we get several scenes of carnage that occur. There's a scene then of Nestor, who has his chariot basically destroyed under him. It says one horse was finished, hit by a shaft. That fair-haired Helen's lord, magnificent Paris, winged at its brow's high peak, where the forelock crowns the skull. And the creature reared in agony, and then it died around the brazen point. And the old horseman, Nestor, tried to cut the horse out of the harness, because there are two horses normally harnessed in there. And if one dies, it drags the whole apparatus down. So he couldn't get away from the oncoming Trojans, who are slaughtering the lines of men as they move forward. And so Nestor is hacking his way out of this trap, basically, from his dead horse. And there's this imminent wave of Trojans coming at him, with Hector rushing down on him, as it says. On came Hector's team. And Diomedes sees this happening, and he sees this old man cutting away at the chariot. And he's moved suddenly to say, we got to help that guy. But what does that mean? That means, of course, that if he goes back to help Nestor, he could get slaughtered by Hector and the oncoming Trojans. So remember, humans risk things and are heroic. Gods don't risk anything and are unheroic. Okay? Diomedes marks the event of Nestor being trapped, and he says to Odysseus, "Where are you running, royal son of Laertes, cool tactician, turning your back in battle like some coward?" He tries to call up a response in him, powerful response in him. "Cutting and running so? Take care that no one spears you in the back. Hold firm with me. We'll fight this wild maniac off the old man here." So he tries to call up in Odysseus what's called a thumatic response. In Greek, thumos is courage or bravery. It's the strength to be able to defend things that are needing to be defended. So A thumotic response is what you hope to have happen. It's what Agamemnon hoped to have happen when he was rousing the troops back in Book 2. Speeches that are given to various characters are done in order to bring up a thumotic response. And here Diomedes, seeing the danger, tries to get Odysseus on board with him, and he tries to call up a thumotic response. But Odysseus is always, he's practical. He's practical. He's not always good and noble. Okay, he's practical. He sees the Argives getting driven back by these hordes of Trojans coming at them very fast, and he sees the possibility of getting slaughtered, and he says, "Nope, I'm out of here." He who turns and runs away lives to fight another day. So he runs away, and Diomedes is left alone, and he goes forward to help Nestor. So he jumps in the chariot with Nestor, and he says, "Old soldier, these young fighters weigh you down. Your strength goes slack, and old age dogs your steps. Your driver's worthless, your horses drag their weight. Come, up with you now. Climb aboard my chariot." So he encourages him to get into his own chariot, and Nestor, seeing he can't save the other horse, he jumps into the chariot with Diomedes, with Diomedes, and he basically takes the reins, and he becomes the driver for Diomedes. And they make a little bit of an impact on the oncoming Trojans. There's a little bit of spear play that occurs, but ultimately they're driven back first by Zeus, as it says. This crash of thunder occurs, and there's a terrific bolt that comes down and blazes wide at the hoof of Diomedes' team. And they're like, "Oh, we can't battle Zeus, right? Because he's obviously fighting for the Trojans right now." So Nestor, the old guy who's very experienced, cries out to Diomedes, right? "Quick, Tydeus, swing these stallions round and fly. Can't you see? Victory comes from Zeus, but not for you. He hands the glory to Hector today, at least. Tomorrow it's ours. If he wants to give us glory, there's not a man alive who can fight the will of Zeus, even a man of iron. Zeus is so much stronger." It kind of reminds me of a scene out of a Pacific where they are taking off after being on the island of, I think, Peleliu, and an old chesty puller, who's the old gunner sergeant, is actually in tears. He's never seen such carnage before. And, when you see the older, more experienced types breaking and losing their cool, it doesn't bode well for the younger fellows in the crew. So Nestor is kind of losing his nerve here and saying, "Let's get out of here." And Diomedes says, "Yeah, I get it, but here's I'm cut to the quick. Hector, if we leave him alone, is going to say, 'Yeah, I chased Diomedes out of town. Diomedes ran for his ships, and I know he'll boast about it, and I don't want that to happen because I'd be embarrassed. My glory, my kleos, my aristeia would be all gone because I ran away from Hector.'" And Nestor says, "Yeah, no, that's nonsense. Let's get out of here, right? Let him call you a coward. Scorn your courage. The Trojan and Dardan troops will never believe him, nor will the wives of the lusty Trojan shieldsmen. Never. You flung their lords in the dust, laid them low in their prime." So Nestor has to encourage Diomedes, remember, you're the guy that stabbed Aphrodite. You're the guy that stabbed Ares. You're the guy that drove the Trojans in front of him. There's no shame in turning and running, right? Turn, run. And so they do. And basically, Hector yells after them. And he says, "Once the Danaan riders prized you first of men with pride of place, choice meats and brimming cups. Now they will disgrace you, a woman after all. Away with you, girl, glittering little puppet. I'll never yield. You'll never mount our towers. Never drag our women back to your ships of war. I'll pack you off to the god of darkness first." And Diomedes is really torn. He doesn't know what to do, whether to stay and fight or whether to turn and run. But Hector, this is interesting here because Hector basically, he expresses here why he wants to do this, to drive the Achaeans before him. He's not doing it, again, for his own glory necessarily. He's not doing it for gain of treasure or anything. He's doing it because he wants to put an end to this war. He wants to drive the Argives away from the city in this almost desperate way that he has about him. And he says these guys are foolish because their ramparts are futile. They'll never hold me back in my onslaught. With the bound team will leap that trench they dug, and soon as I reach their hollow ships, torches Don't forget to bring me lethal fire. I'll burn their ships. I'll slaughter all their men. Argive heroes panicked and smoke among their hulls. And he calls to his horses and praises his horses. And he says, I'm filled, if only we lay our hands on these ships, I'm filled with hope. They'll take to their racing ships this very night. I love that, because again, that's the Hector and the heroism of Hector. Why is he doing this? He's doing this because he hopes that by pushing the Greeks into the sea, he can finally end the war. He is filled with hope. Things are going really well. This looks like a turning of the tide, and looks like I can finally save my city, save my wife, save my little boy. And as we find, it's going to get pretty close. So Hera, though, looking down, because we flip back to the gods, Hera looking down gets really mad. And she goes to Poseidon. She says, help me out, Poseidon. We got to go against Zeus. We got to stop him. All right, now's our chance to do so, because otherwise those Trojans are going to kill all the Argives. And then I'll lose, and my fame will be diminished. And Poseidon says, what wild words? What are you saying? I, for one, have no desire to battle Zeus. Not you and I and the rest of the gods together. The king's far too strong. He'll crush us all. Poseidon is a god almost equal in power to Zeus. For him to say this indicates something about his character. We could say cowardly, but cowardly, this is the guy that shakes the earth. This is the guy that controls the tides in Greek mythology. This is the guy who unleashes sea monsters, like the Kraken. Release the Kraken. This is the guy who has built the walls of Troy, and he's scared to go up against Zeus. And he's immortal, and he's scared to go up against Zeus. He can't die, but he's scared to go up against Zeus. Big, brawny guy. If this isn't a form of Homeric humor and iconoclasm, I don't know what is. It's a Poseidon, the big, tough, burly god, being a coward, essentially. He won't go up against Zeus. One of the main reasons none of the gods will go up against Zeus is not physical power. It's these thunderbolts that Zeus has. Pardon me. And what are those thunderbolts? That raises the whole story of the Titanomachy, the war with the Titans. And Titanomachy, there we go. The Titanomachy, the war with the Olympian gods. And I think I've alluded to this before. It's a myth that all of Homer's audience would have known. There was an earlier generation of gods called the Titans, and they were in power for thousands of years, millions of years. And then the Olympian gods were born into the world, and they were prophesied to take over. And so the head of the Titans, Kronos, swallowed all of his children as they were born, one after the other. And because they were immortal, they didn't die, right? So they were inside of Kronos. But one of the gods was saved from being swallowed because his mother, Gaia, didn't want him to die. And he's the youngest of these gods. And so she gave Kronos a stone instead, wrapped up in a diaper. And Kronos swallowed it, and he swallowed the stone in a diaper. And Gaia took the youngest, named Zeus, and put him into a cave and had these characters make noise every time that he cried. And so he grew up in this cave, and he grows up like a god. So like within a day or two, he's fully adult. The gods are like that. It's weird. And so he comes back and he makes war against his own father, Kronos, and he overthrows him. Kronos had overthrown his father, Uranus, before that. And then Zeus overthrows Kronos, and all the other Titans make war on him. And the brothers and sisters of Zeus are vomited up from Kronos when he's defeated by Zeus. And they join Zeus to make war against the Titans. And the Olympian gods, as they're called, almost are losing, but they then employ the help of these very old creatures called the Hecatonkerae. I think that's what they're called, Hecatonkerae, the 100 armed characters. The 100 armed characters are like giants with 100 arms. And they make for Zeus a special weapon, the lightning bolts. And the lightning bolts basically are used by Zeus against the Titans, and nothing can stand in their way. Between the lightning bolts and the fighting Hecatonkerae and the Olympian gods, they overthrow the Titanic gods, and they take over rule of the universe on Mount Olympus, where they're seated. And that's essentially the story of the Titanomachy, the War of the Titans, or War against the Titans. This is, you can find this if you want to in the book Theogony by Hesiod. Kind of an interesting little read, Theogony's Hesiod. Again, Theogony by Hesiod, it's 730 to 700 BC, so it's actually after Homer. But the legends that Hesiod is referring to precede Homer. Is that confusing enough? Good. Okay. So Homer's referring to the fact that Zeus has these lightning bolts, and he can smash anything he wants with a lightning bolt because, it's a lightning bolt. It's like the power of an atomic bomb. And the gods don't want to go up against it. But what Homer does is interesting because he takes that myth of the lightning bolts, he uses it in order to display the character of the other Olympians. They're all older than Zeus. Well, older being a relative concept with gods that are immortal, but they're all born before Zeus. Zeus is the youngest, and he's ruling over his elder brothers and sisters, one of whom is his wife, Hera, and ruling over them by sheer force alone, and by beating his breast and yelling and screaming and stomping around Olympus. Again, is this what we want out of gods? Probably not. So here we are in this situation with Poseidon not wanting to join Hera as she decides to go off and fight on the side of the Argives. And you might ask yourself, where did all this stuff come from? What are we talking about when we're talking about these gods? They seem bizarre. Well, one of the things we have to consider is that the ancient world considered them very real, that they didn't just think that they were concepts, they weren't conceptual. The conceptualization of the gods didn't occur until about the 5th, maybe 4th century BC. And even there, that was only among the elite. Most people consider the gods to be actual beings that were in the universe, and that sometimes they took on human form, but mostly they were powers, beings, forces. You couldn't afford to tick off those forces, right? But if you looked at it historically, and there's a very good book called the Olympian Gods. I forget the author. I'll put it in the notes if I remember. Historically, what we're looking at is we're looking at different forces of the universe. And those forces of the universe were embodied in characters that were sometimes anthropomorphized into humans. So, for instance, the story of Zeus is that Zeus seems to be what's called an Indo-European god. That is a god that came down with the people of the north as they migrated south and conquered territories. And Zeus seems to have been an embodiment of the Indo-European god who was the sky. As they moved into the south and Zeus moved with them, they took over various areas and they found that there were already gods there and goddesses. So the locals were, you keep your gods and we will have our gods. And our gods are obviously ruling, but your gods should have a place somewhere. And so we'll put them into our pantheon. And so they would incorporate into the pantheon the earlier existing gods and goddesses. And that's why we have like overlapping stories of gods and who's competing for power and who's on top and all this. And one could say that perhaps the Titans were earlier gods that these Indo-European gods replaced when they moved into the area. That's one way to look at it. You could also say that Hera, for instance, she means shining lady. She might have been a goddess, a part of a goddess cult that that then was incorporated in as a possibility. One way not to look at it is that the gods and goddesses were not crafted by foolish or primitive people. They were crafted by people that were very intelligent and were very aware of the world around them, and were not not primitive when they were creating them. We'll put it that way. One thing I like to point out too is that if you look at the other two major gods, Poseidon and Hades, Hadeos was given the power to rule over the underworld, and he was called the wealthy one, Plutus. And Hadeos, Hades, was the original overlord sky god before he was conquered by the Indo-European people. And they conquered that sky god and said, well, our god is the sky god, but your god can have this powerful realm here of Hadeos. And so he's relegated to that realm. And the same thing seems to happen to Poseidon. Poseidon, or Poseidon, was the sky god who gets relegated to the realm of the ocean, the Poseidon. And one way or the other, as successive generations came in, they would replace these gods or put them into the pantheon somewhere and give them new roles. And over time, you get the pantheon of Olympus, but it's never, nobody ever like sets it down as this is it. This is all there's ever been. It's just like these are the dominant gods at the time. Indo-European for sky, by the way, is Zeo. And so Zeo, Zeus, Dios, is the same as we see even in Latin, Deus. Deus, as in a Deus ex machina. Deu is just the sky, Zeo. So sky god, sky. Anyway, back to our text. When we see Poseidon quaking in his boots at the thought of Zeus smiting him with a weapon from the Hecatonchire, it's kind of demeaning to Poseidon. And Hera certainly sees it as so. She's like, yeah, you're a wuss. And so she goes and decides, well, if I can't get him, I'm going to get Athena. Athena is a powerful goddess. And so she goes up to her and says, this is shame. This is terrible, right? You got to join with me. We got to do something. So anyway, they harangued each other to a standstill. And then we go back to the Achaean forces and the fighting. And Agamemnon goes around encouraging his forces, fight, you guys. We can't be driven back to the ships and lose in a day what we have taken 9 years to take. This is disgraceful. Imagine the tension. Hector, who's fought for 9 years to protect his city, now has a chance to be able to end this war finally. He can't go back into the city. I mean, this is the moment. This is it. And Agamemnon, who has been fighting for 9 years to get close to the city, conquering all the surrounding territories and several suburbs and the like, he suddenly sees imminent disaster coming upon him, and he can't lose after 9 years. This is crazy. I've invested all this time and effort and money into this and blood, and we can't lose. So he prays to Zeus. And the father, filled with pity, seeing Atrides weep, bent his head that the armies must be saved, not die in blood. That instant he launched an eagle, truest of Zeus's signs that fly the skies, a fawn clutched in its talons, sprung of a running doe, but he dropped it free beside the handsome shrine where Achaean soldiers always sacrificed to Zeus, whose voice rings clear with omens. Seeing the eagle sent their way from Zeus, they roused their war lust, flung themselves on the Trojans with a vengeance. Now you get a push the other way. And so Trojans have pushed the Greeks all the way to the trenches, and the Greeks come out and push the Trojans back the other way. And you get more carnage, Diomedes being forefront in this. And then there's a scene with Teucer. Yeah, Teucer is the sniper. He's a bowman. And bowmen were greatly feared in the ancient world military because they were very dangerous, and they can move quickly. Light armed troops. They would hide under the shields of others, or they would hide behind rocks and snipe. Even worse were slingmen who would sling stones. But Teucer is a bowman, a sniper, and he's out there picking guys off and hiding behind a shield. And he gets seen Agamemnon's like, yeah, good job, keep it up. And Teucer says, with all the power in me, I've never quit. Not from the time we rolled them back to Troy. I stalked with my bow and picked them off in packs. 8 arrows I've let fly with long, sharp barbs, and all stuck in the flesh of soldiers quick to fight. But I still can't bring this mad dog Hector down. And he looses another fresh shaft for Hector, but he misses him again. And he hits Gorgythion, the well-bred son of Priam. And it pierced his chest, and he gets cast into the earth. And there's a really great, what's called a Homeric simile here. Homer litters his work with these similes, which you could say are time killers, because you have to sing this piece and so you fill it up. But I think it's more than that. I think every simile that he has it's giving you a much more vivid depiction of what's happening, because most people wouldn't maybe see this kind of carnage. And this one particularly strikes me as being powerful. A Homeric simile is normally an extended comparison between a known thing and an unknown thing, normally. So here you have the death of Gorgythion, shot down by an arrow, and it says, as a garden poppy burst into red bloom, bends, drooping its head to one side, weighed down by its full seeds and a sudden spring shower, so Gorgythion's head fell limp over one shoulder, weighed down by his helmet. It's a really interesting little image. Something which I think maybe Homer, it could be said, had seen people die in battle. Poppies are large flowers, and when they get overloaded, even without rain, they bend their own stalks and they bend downwards. And the dying man here, Gorgythion, is shot with an arrow, can't hold up his head, let alone the head with the helmet, and just kind of slumps over like this. And he's still riding around in a chariot, but he's dead. It's a particularly powerful image, I think, of death. And notice also that poppies normally were red colored, or magenta colored. So it kind of, humans are like leaves, humans are like poppies, humans are like grass. They die quickly. And here that's particularly poignant, I think, with the Homeric simile that's brought up. So we go on, and we have more killing. Hector goes for Teucer, and he hits him with a rock. He throws a rock at him, and it says, Hector, helmet flashing, caught him where the collarbone bridges neck and chest, the deadliest spot of all. There Hector struck, hurling the jagged rock at Teucer, drawing in fury, snapped the string, and his hand went numb at the wrist. He dropped to a knee, dazed, and the bow slipped from his grip. So Ajax saves him, but he's out of commission. So much for the sniper. And and so basically we finish up here. After all this carnage occurring, Hector swerves his horses round at the trench's edge, tossing their gorgeous manes, and Hector's eyes glaring bright as a Gorgon's eyes, Ares, man destroying Ares, a total rout. And then we go back to the gods. Okay, so we switch from this very poignant scene of humans dying almost like flowers or grass, and it's quite awful, really. If you were to see this in battle, and guys that were vibrant men, fighters and chariot drivers and arrow bowmen, and suddenly they're just dying left and right. And we switch back to the gods. And there's a comparison I think Homer's making. Because you see here, Athena says, or Hera says to Athena, says, look, isn't this bad? Don't we care for these men any longer? Aren't we gods that are supposed to care? All our Argives are dying. So let's do something. Let's rebel against Zeus. And Athena says, yeah, let them die 1,000 deaths, right? Hector and all of them. His life, his battle frenzy blotted out by the Argives here on his native soil, right? I want him to die cruelly in the dirt here on his native, right in front of his mom. I want him to burst. That's not very nice. But she says, but Dad, Zeus is raging. I don't want to go against him. Right? I don't want to go against the lightning bolts. So I wish that I'd foreseen all this, and I don't know what to do. Basically, the day will come when father calls me his darling gray-eyed girl again. So now you harness the racing team for us. I'll go into the halls of stormy Zeus and buckle on my gear. And so she does. So she goes and gets her war gear, and they go to attack Hector. And they're just getting into the chariot, and they're ready to run on down. There's a crack of the whip. They're ready to run on down there and help the Argives. But Zeus catches wind of them. He catches sight of them, and he sends a messenger from Mount Ida to Hera and Athena. He sends Iris, and he says, quick on your way now, Iris, shear the wind. Turn them back. Don't let them engage me here. What an indignity for us to clash in arms. I'll tell you this, and I will fulfill it too. I'll maim their racers for them, right beneath their yokes, and those two goddesses, I'll hurl them from their chariot, smash their car, and not once in the course of 10 slow wheeling years will they heal the wounds my lightning bolt rips open. So that gray-eyed girl of mine may learn what it means to fight against her father. Though with Hera, though I'm not so outraged, so irate, it's always her way to thwart my will, whatever I command. Hera and Zeus are always, it's a very almost domestic scene, battling Bickersons, right? The honeymooners or something like that. It's this fighting between man and wife that occurs on a regular basis down Mount Olympus. He sends Iris down, and Iris gives the message. But it's kind of funny what she says. And again, Homeric humor. Notice, here's Iris saying what Zeus just said. And the herald is supposed to deliver exactly what was said. Otherwise, they get in trouble. So she says, where are you rushing now? What is this madness blazing in your hearts? Zeus forbids you to fight for Achaia's armies. So far, so good, right? She's just reiterating what has been said before. And then she says, here is father's threat. He will fulfill it too. And she goes into her heraldic messenger mode. He'll maim your racers for you right beneath their yokes, and you two goddesses, he'll hurl you from your chariot, smash your car, and not once in the course of 10 slow wheeling years will you heal the wounds his lightning bolt rips open. Okay? Almost word for word. So you, his gray-eyed girl, may learn what it means to fight against your father. Again, almost verbatim. But with Hera, though he is not so outraged, so irate, it's always your way to thwart his will, whatever Zeus commands. See, it's almost identical to what has been said before. She's repeating what Zeus says. And if we go back up here for a minute, right? It's always her way to thwart my will, whatever I command. Go. But Iris, she doesn't quite stop there. It's kind of amusing, because she should have stopped right here, but she doesn't. She adds a little bit of irisiness to her message. She says to Hera, you insolent brazen bitch, you really dare to shake that monstrous spear in father's face? Iris just can't resist letting her own opinion of Hera be known at this point. It's a little bit amusing. She deviates from the script. And again, if we're looking at the gods as characters to be emulated, characters to be admired, characters to be thought of as noble, this isn't really it. This is like the little yapping dog almost, or like the little child sending out the insult and then running away. Because it says Iris racing the wind, went veering past. So she calls Hera this awful name, and then she says, all right, I'm out of here, and takes off. And Hera turns to Pallas and says, yeah, enough. Daughter of Zeus, whose shield is thunder, I cannot let us battle the father any longer, not for mortal men. So timeout, right? But they haven't even gotten to the battle. There's been no risk. They've not been stabbed. They've not been cut. They haven't even hardly gotten out of Olympus. And so all that zeal, right? Let's go protect the Argives. Let's go fight the Trojans. Let's go do this. Let's go do that. Never mind. Forget it. I don't want to get hurt. What do you make of that, right? What do you make of that? Not only does Hera say, let's turn around and go back, because I'm really kind of a chicken. She says, men, let one of them die, another live, however their luck may run. Let Zeus decide the fates of the men of Troy and men of Argos both to his deathless heart's content. That is only right. So she's justifying her decision. So like, oh, it's right that Zeus's will gets obeyed. And, men are going to die. So what can we do? Let's let them die if they're going to die. Again, what does that say about the character of Hera, the supreme goddess of Olympus? And Athena's not that much better, because Athena just turns around and goes back with her. It says the goddesses themselves sat down on golden settles, mixing with the immortals. Athena and Hera's hearts within them dashed, right? So they both go back. They both chicken out. They both leave the field of battle. And Zeus comes back too, to Olympus, and immediately he taunts the women. As though there was already a case against the gods with them being cowards, being chicken, not risking anything. But then Zeus struts in and is like, oh, you upset little girly whirlies. I'm sorry. Am I too big for you? Not overly tired, I trust, from all your efforts there in glorious battles, slaughtering Trojans, the men you break with your deathless rage. I love that, because they haven't even got to the battle before they turned around. But I, with my courage, my hands, never conquered. For all their force, not all the gods on Olympus heights could ever turn me back. But the two of you, long ago the trembling shook your glistening limbs before you could glimpse the horrid works of war. I tell you this, and it would have come to pass. Once my lightning had blasted you in your chariot, you could never have returned to Mount Olympus, where the immortals make their home. They couldn't return to Mount Olympus. Why? They're immortal. Why? Well, because although they're immortal, they might get scarred, and Zeus might blast them full in the face, and then they would have scars, and they would be ugly. And you can't be ugly in Mount Olympus, because it's a very exclusive country club. That would be bad for their vanity. So again, Zeus, not someone you want to emulate. Hera, not someone you want to emulate. Athena, not someone you want to emulate. It's like all the gods end up being these terrible characters. The female gods Hera and Athena sit there pouting and snarking at Zeus afterwards, and Zeus is like, "Yeah, tomorrow you can have your chance. You'll try again tomorrow." But it's not something that you look at and you say, "Oh, all praise to Zeus," or "All praise to Athena or Hera." Right? It doesn't come out that way. I care nothing for you and your snarling anger. None in the world a meaner bitch than you. So he erupted. And they didn't answer him. They just kind of sit there and pout. And the glory, the warfare goes on with the men. And you get more of this struggle between the various Argives and the Trojans. Hector trying to array his troops to take advantage of the opportunity. And we end this chapter, all the Trojans are elated because they've driven the Argives so far back to their ships. And the Argives really at a point where they're kind of terrified that this might be it. This might be the end of the war. So we end this chapter with them in their camps. Night falls, and they can't make battle at night. And so they're in camps, but the Trojans are much closer to defeating the Argives than they have been in 9 years. It says 1,000 fires are burning there on the plain, and beside each fire sat 50 fighting men, poised in the leaping blaze, and champing oats and glistening barley, stationed by their chariots. Stallions waited for dawn to mount her glowing throne. It's a good end to the chapter, and a good place for us perhaps to conclude. I did raise earlier the story of Athena. Maybe that's a good place to stop. We'll very quickly tell that myth, and then we can end for this session and move on to the next book. Athena is one of the most popular gods in Greek mythology. She is the goddess of wisdom, warfare, the arts, craftiness in war. She's the goddess of young women, especially that have come of age. So from Artemis to Athena. Athena is called the virgin goddess, Athena Parthenos. She's the virgin birthed goddess and the virgin goddess. So She has, as it says here, symbols owls, olive trees, snakes, and the Gorgon, because the defeat of the Gorgon is attributed to one of her denizens anyway, one of her followers. And so she takes the Gorgon and puts it on her shield, and you often see her with her shield, and the Gorgon is on the shield next to her. Or it might be on her breastplate. Sometimes you see it on the war plate that she wears in armor in battle. She is it says she's a palace goddess. She is the guardian of Athens, obviously. And her birth is particularly interesting. And, I've talked about how sometimes the myths to us modern Westerners seem bizarre. They seem odd. Leda and the Swan is odd. The swallowing of children by Kronos is odd. Again, it's not made. These aren't made up by foolish people. They are made up over many, many years. They are made up as symbolic representations, you could say. They always are in order to think about an idea, or craft an idea, or embody an idea in words. And the same thing with the birth of Athena, because Athena, it says here, let's say in Greek mythology, she's born from the forehead of her father Zeus. And again, you get this from Hesiod, the Theogony. So it says this occurred after Zeus swallowed his consort, his lover, his woman, Metis, while she was pregnant with Athena. So, okay, Zeus has an affair. He has lots of affairs. He has an affair with Metis, and Metis conceives the child Athena. And Zeus swallows Metis. Notice a similar thing to what Kronos did to his kids, swallowing his kids, because of the prophecy that they would overthrow him. And Zeus swallows Metis, partly because Metis says in ancient Greek religion, she is the pre-Olympian goddess of wisdom, counsel, and deep thought. She's a member of the Oceanids, notable for being the advisor and first wife of Zeus, king of the gods. She first helped him to free his siblings from their father. So Metis goes way back. She is definitely someone with whom he has an affair, but it goes way back because, again, if we're thinking about these as Indo-European gods that came down with the successive invasions of Greece, Metis was an Indo-European goddess, consort of the original Indo-European god Zeu. And she comes into Greek mythology as the queen goddess, but there's already a queen, right? The shining lady, Hera, locally. So I guess you can call it a political marriage or a marriage of convenience. Zeus marries Hera, and she's incorporated into the pantheon. And so what do you do with Metis? Well, Metis is set aside, as you would do in the ancient world. If you made a political marriage, you would set aside your previous wife. Or you might keep her as an advisor. Sometimes that happened. Or sometimes a powerful lord would have a harem, they would call it in the Middle East, a harem of different wives that he was capable of sustaining with food and drink and clothing and shelter. And those wives would all of them be in ranked order and related to each other, and some bossing over others, and there'd be infighting and sometimes civil war. And we see that in the Old Testament with the war of Absalom and his other brothers by other wives. Metis is the earlier wife of Zeus, and she is replaced with Hera, and so she disappears. And I guess you could say that what better place to put Metis than inside of Zeus? She's immortal. He's immortal. Put her inside. Anyway, he swallows Metis. Okay? All right. Let's move on. And then he has this terrible headache. Ow. Kefalimu. Spouted Kefalimu. And so what do you do when you have a bad headache? Well, what he does is he calls Hephaestus and he says, help. And Hephaestus comes at him with an axe, and he splits open the head of Zeus with an axe. Again, just go with it. And out springs Athena, fully armed, fully ready for battle. Ka-chang! Out of the head of Zeus. which again, you could say, what? But again, that's the way it is. She comes out fully armed, helmet, shield, breastplate, spear, yelling, charges into the world. And so she becomes kind of his favorite daughter and his closest daughter, and one who caused him the most pain, but also that was like his childbirth, I guess you could say. And so he's closest to her for that. So if you wanted to interpret it in terms of a psychological or a symbolic thing, the way they do around the 5th century, you could say that Zeus, who represents order and structure and power, rational thought, gives birth through the intellect to this craftiness, this ability to see the world as possibilities, this twists and turns, this polytropon business that Athena is famous for. And you could take the myth that way if it helps. One way or the other, she bursts into the world, and ever after she has a sort of dicey relationship with her dad. Her dad loves her best than any of his other numerous children, and she seems to love him and respects him, but she frequently goes against him, as in this case with Troy and the Greeks. So it's a complicated affair. It's a complicated business. Just know that that's the story that we're assuming here in this story of the Iliad. Zeus loves Athena partly because he gave birth to her, and make of that as you will. As it is, I think that's sufficient for today, and I thank you so much for joining me as you did, and I hope that this has been beneficial to you. And if it has been beneficial to you, please feel free to leave a comment in the comment section or a question. I'd be glad to answer anything you have. I've enjoyed going through with you Iliad Book 8, and let's look forward to getting together again next week if we can. My schedule is getting a little bit topsy-turvy because of the start of the school year, so I might have to adjust. But we'll get together, we'll read that pivotal book, Book 9, The Embassy to Achilles. Because remember, little blubber boy has to come back into the story here. So we'll draw him in again and see if maybe he might fight. Maybe. Anyway, until next time, God be with you. Take care. Thank you so much for joining me.